just released his list of potential names, potential nominees for the U.S. Supreme Court. 11 people on the list here, possible nominees in the event Mr. Trump is elected president. So let's bring in, first up, Sarah Murray, who's been looking through some of these names before we bring in our panel. And Sarah Murray, important to point out, as you have, that some of these names match what we've seen from the conservative think tank in Washington, the Heritage Foundation, names they've floated this past spring.
That's right, Brooke. Donald Trump released 11 names. I think roughly 5 of them have been floated by the Heritage Foundation before. And some of these names, Dianne Sykes, William Pryor, John Willett, these are all names that a lot of conservatives are very comfortable with, that you would have seen from other potential presidential candidates. And so I think what this is it's Donald Trump trying to send the signal that he will be conservative if he is elected president. He will elect a conservative to the bench, and trying to maybe allay some of the fears of supporters potentially of Ted Cruz, for instance, who were really hoping to elect someone who has shown conservative principles in the past. I think Trump and his campaign know that not everyone in the Republican Party are totally comfortable with him. Obviously, we've seen some people state that publicly. And so this is a sort of way to help rally people behind him. And Brooke, the other thing I want to mention is not all of these justices have had friendly things to say about Donald Trump in the past. Some of them have private connections to, Never Trump movement, to people who have supported opponents of Donald Trump in the primary. And so it says that, it's not just about loyalty for Trump when it comes to nominating someone to the bench like this, that he is looking at people's credentials. And I think that that's going to sort of help maybe send a little bit of calm to some conservatives who had been a little skeptical of Trump.
And also, having just spoken to Dana Bash, noteworthy, when we were covering the big meeting in Washington between the Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, and Donald Trump last Thursday, this was a crucial part of that conversation on, what sort of justice Mr. Trump would nominate if he were to become president. Sarah Murray, thank you so much. Let me bring in some legal voices here to walk us all through these different names, because I know a lot of you have no idea who these people are. So I have constitutional attorney Pate standing by, and CNN contributor and American University law professor Steve Vladeck. So, gentlemen, Paige, let me begin with you, as we haven't heard from you yet. I understand you know William Pryor. He's one of these 11 names. You know Mr. Pryor quite well. Who is he?
Well, I've been in front of Judge Pryor several times. I'm not a personal friend of his, but I certainly know his judicial philosophy and his temperament. He is a reliably conservative judge by all accounts. In fact, you may recall that his appointment to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals here in Atlanta, which is where he currently sits, was somewhat controversial itself. He was President Bush's choice, but he was not unanimously confirmed. In fact, it was pretty close as to whether or not he would even get that seat. But since he's held that seat, he's been very conservative, and I think this is someone that the far right would certainly be comfortable with as a nominee.
So, Steve, can you chime in? Who are these other names?
Sure. I mean, I think what's interesting about this list is these are, in some cases, state Supreme Court justices. So Tom Lee, Don Willett, folks like that, David Strauss, these are 3 state Supreme Court justices who have very strong reputations, very consistently conservative reputations. Ariane mentioned right before the break that the Supreme Court right now is mostly former federal appeals judges. Having those 3 names on the list might be a suggestion that a President Trump would look to the state courts as well. And Brooke, of note, Tom Lee is Senator Mike Lee's brother. And so when it comes to a potential Senate confirmation process, that can't hurt.
And Steve, just staying with you, what sort of message? You made an excellent point earlier. You were saying to me essentially the list is tantalizing for conservatives, right? No way might this list be binding, meaning this is who Mr. Trump is floating right now. If he were to become elected president, that doesn't necessarily mean that he would go with any of these names.
No, I mean, there's nothing that requires him to, and indeed, I mean, Brooke, even if he were to put one of these names forward, there's nothing that requires him to keep with it if he changes his mind. So I think what we're seeing here is actually a very shrewd political move by Mr. Trump in basically giving all of this red meat to conservatives who might have been very concerned about his candidacy and saying, look, you can trust me, these are the kinds of people I want to put on the Supreme Court in Justice Scalia's seat. We heard Josh Earnest talk about how there's a real contrast between
Actually, on that, let's go to that sound. Thank you for bringing that up. Josh Earnest at the White House just a little while ago.
I would be surprised if there are any Democrats who would describe any of those 11 individuals as a consensus nominee. But the individual that President Obama has put forward is somebody that Republicans have described as a consensus nominee. And I think that speaks to the wisdom of the Senate acting on the president's nomination. And I think it speaks to the president's commitment to fulfilling his constitutional responsibilities to fill the vacancy on the Supreme Court in a way that is consistent with his desire to protect the Supreme Court from the kind of partisan wars that it's been subjected to of late.
So to your point, Steve Vladeck, you know, this is the White House quickly coming out and reminding everyone that the president would like Judge Merrick Garland, who they consider a consensus nominee, unlike, they're saying, this list.
Well, indeed. I mean, I think we have statements from people like Utah Senator Orrin Hatch, who has said that someone like Judge Garland is eminently confirmable. And I think there's a really sharp contrast between someone like Merrick Garland, who really is a centrist, and the names on this list. If I look at this, I see 11 dyed-in-the-wool conservatives who really are the exact kind of judge that I suspect most conservatives would like to see replace Justice Scalia. You know, the real question is this just Donald Trump placating the conservative base of the Republican Party, or is this really what he wants in the next Supreme Court justice?
Sure. True follow-through, true to form in terms of listening to Republicans he met with on the Hill last Thursday. Paige, here's my question for you. You know, Sarah Murray and others have been reporting that maybe approximately 5 of the 11 here were floated from the Heritage Foundation. Would Donald Trump have spoken with any of these folks before making this list public?
I think that's a possibility, Brooke. We know that he mentioned Judge Pryor's name during one of the debates right after Justice Scalia died. So we know he's been thinking about at least that name and perhaps a couple of others for a long time. I think it would be unusual, though, for the judges to engage in any discussions about a possible nomination at this point, especially the ones that serve on the federal courts of appeal. It's possible the state court judges may have talked with him, but I think it would be unusual if he's actually had any sit-down meetings or discussions of any significance with these other folks.
All right, Paige Pate and Steve Vladeck, thank you both so much.